afternoon and welcome to Capital Account. I'm Lauren Lister here in Washington, D.C. Here are your headlines for March 7th, 2012. Well, Super Tuesday came and went, and if anything, it seems more like a super letdown. As the economy dominates the agenda this election year, voters have failed to flock to the one candidate who actually has a long-term view and addresses the concerns of sound money and monetary policy and represents an actual shift from the status quo. So why is that? We'll take a look at what gives. Meanwhile, Germany does seem to be taking a cue from Republican presidential hopeful Ron Paul, who has long called for an audit of the U.S.'s gold reserves. Well, the Bundesbank is reportedly reviewing its gold reserves. Are they taking stock in case of a Eurozone collapse? We'll answer that question. And is Financial Judgment Day upon us?
They lived only to face a new nightmare, the war against the machines.
Ooh, yesterday we told you about the computer Jeopardy champion Watson going to work on Wall Street. Now, UBS head floor trader Art Cashin is talking about artificial intelligence, saying machines may explain some unusual financial market behavior that's been going on. We'll debate where this is all headed. Let's get to today's Capital Account. So Super Tuesday came and went, and it didn't seem all that super. 10 states voted in Super Tuesday caucuses or primaries for the Republican presidential nomination. Now, this election year is supposed to be all about the economy, and this topic is what we focus a lot on. And we talk a lot about the problems with the U.S. debt, the deficit, the Fed, its monetary policy, fiat currency. We talk to a lot of guests who are most concerned and focused on these issues, and there is really only one candidate who is really focused on them too. Someone who Bill Gross, co-founder of PIMCO, the largest bond fund in the world, has gravitated towards, for example, and here he is explaining a good reason why.
I'm a little Ron Paulish there, Mandy, to take a political slant. I think both parties basically, have done the same thing, and they would complain relative to each other, but both parties basically, have followed a policy that hasn't promoted long-term investment in the United States, and I think ultimately we need to produce things as opposed to paper.
We couldn't agree more. Now, Ron Paul has certainly seen his popularity and the popularity of his ideas grow, and he draws huge crowds of supporters. But take a look at the delegates that have been racked up by the candidates, and you can see that he way pales in comparison. And when it came to Super Tuesday, it appears he had no first place win. So what really explains this?
Maybe it's not the politicians who suck. Maybe something else sucks around here, like the public. Yeah, the public sucks.
Well, there's one idea, and the mainstream media can't exactly help. As an example, look at MSNBC's Super Tuesday show open and see if you notice anything.
If you've liked the Republican Party trying to pick its presidential nominee so far this year, you are going to love tonight.
Did you see anybody missing there? To talk about where our economy and country appear headed now, let's bring in Paul Craig Roberts. He's economist and former Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Treasury under Ronald Reagan, and he is here to tell us what he thinks. As always, it's a pleasure to see you, Dr. Roberts. Thanks for being on the show.
Glad to be with you.
Absolutely. So I talked to a lot of really smart people on this show, guests, you included, who sing the praises of Ron Paul and his economic policies. And he focuses on a lot of the things that we focus on this show, too. And I've also seen what seems like rising support for him. So correct my perception, or maybe tell me what you think is really going on, that he, who sounds like he has some of the most sane approaches to these issues that face the country, why do you think he hasn't gotten more support in these primaries from the public?
I think there's several reasons. One, of course, is that the public doesn't really understand economic issues. I've been writing columns about economics since the mid-'70s. And I find that most readers are usually at a loss when you start talking about economics. So if they can't judge it for themselves, they can't judge a candidate who has a good solution. So that's part of the problem. Another part of the problem is the American media, what Gerald Celente calls prostitutes. They've been sort of bad-mouthing Ron Paul, even demonizing him. And so the public gets influenced by the anti-Ron Paul propaganda from the media. And then I think Ron Paul himself has not been as clever as he should have been, because he has allowed himself to be positioned as somebody who will threaten the social safety net, Social Security, Medicare, that so many tens of millions of people are now dependent upon. And so when you add all those three together, you can see why. In fact, I would add a fourth. The most important thing about Ron Paul, in my opinion, is that he defends the Constitution. He stands up for the Constitution. And of course, for the last 10 years, the Constitution has been murdered, first by Bush and Cheney, and now by Obama. And so we're essentially losing the Constitution, which means that we're losing the country. And that's really the most important issue, and that's the reason the people should be flocking to Ron Paul, because that's more important than the economy or anything else. If you lose the Constitution, which we've done now, you're finished. And so this doesn't seem to be appreciated by the general public. They seem to be completely in the dark.
And Dr. Roberts, you believe that the public's in the dark, and let's stick to the economy just because it is so important right now and very important on this show. What you call, or who you call prostitutes, you say they don't do a good job of covering Ron Paul, or they don't cover him, or they demonize him. But this day and age, come on, there are so many sources on the internet. There are shows like ours that don't do that. There are lots of sources. So do you really think that it is the press to blame, or at this point, is it the public? Come on, we got to get it together as Americans at some point.
Well, of course, they're both to blame. But, look, many people in the public, they get up. They've got to commute to work. They're stressed. The traffic's going to be awful. They turn on the TV while they chug-a-lug a cup of coffee. They listen to a few sound bites off the TV. They get in the car. They might hear a few sound bites on the car radio. They come home. They're dying for a drink. They flick on the TV. They hear a few sound bites while they have a drink, and they've lost interest. And they don't have time to be informed, to use the internet, to watch the RT programs. This takes a certain amount of commitment and awareness.
It's certainly a lot. Yeah, it's certainly a lot easier to listen to a soundbite than it is to figure out how exactly monetary policy works, or the impact of 0% interest rates, especially with the Fed being as lacking in transparency as it is. Which brings me to this question. A lot of people thought, hey, Ron Paul was never going to win the nomination, maybe never expected to win any of these states. The fact that he has increased in popularity and gotten more votes than he did in 2008, and advanced an agenda that includes looking at monetary policy, the Federal Reserve, quantitative easing, sound money. The fact that those have been pushed more towards the mainstream dialogue, is that a win in itself?
Well, that's an improvement, yes. So that is an important contribution that he's made. Like you, I would have thought that he would have had much more impact, because you see all of the interest rates right now are negative.
Yeah.
And the Federal Reserve is running monetary policy solely for the benefit of the insolvent banks. So to keep the banks from having to pay the cost of their own mistakes, they're depriving all the retired population of any income off their savings.
Yeah.
So the retired people are having to spend down their capital. And if you spend down your capital before you're dead, you haven't got anything to live on. You certainly don't have any inheritance for your children. So the policy of the Federal Reserve is impoverishing Americans.
Yeah, savers. Savers can't save. People living on fixed income can't save. And this is something that's directly connected to the Fed's policies of 0% interest rates, which someone like Ron Paul talks a lot about. And I, too, am perplexed as to why that hasn't connected more with more of the American public. But let's talk about, since we're on monetary policy, another thing that Ron Paul has called for is an audit of the United States gold reserves. He's called for that for a long time. And interestingly, a German newspaper is reporting that German lawmakers are doing this. So U.S. lawmakers are not, but Germany is evidently worried about how their gold has been managed and how the inventory has been kept. There's some concern about the balance sheet of the central bank. If a Eurozone collapse is upon the Eurozone, it could stand to lose. The Bundesbank, one report said about €500 billion, which is a lot of money. In this scenario, Germany could need gold reserves to support its currency. 60% is reportedly stored outside of Germany. A lot of that, or some of that, in the New York Fed. A lot of countries keep their gold there. I don't know how many people know that. So what about in a scenario where there is just a dire monetary crisis, something horrible happens? In a nuclear option, and this is something that Jim Rickards describes in his book, Currency Wars, should a country like Germany worry that the U.S. could confiscate its gold?
Yes, they should. In fact, they should be worried that the U.S. hasn't already sold it to bust up all the gold rallies that keep trying to start. You know, no one knows whether there's any gold in Fort Knox or not, and the fact that they don't do an audit makes it highly suspicious. You would think it'd be the easiest thing in the world to have somebody go in and say, yes, the gold's there. Mm-hmm. But if they don't want to do that, then that kind of implies it might not be there.
So are you saying you think that that's why there hasn't been an audit of U.S. gold reserves, or do you think there hasn't been a large enough demand for one?
You know, it's such an easy thing to do. Mm. I don't know why they wouldn't do it just to shut up the critics or just to create confidence. Mm-hmm. Or there's no reason not to do it unless the gold isn't there or unless some parts of it are missing. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I don't really understand it.
Yeah, it's a question that remains unanswered. It's not something that other candidates are asking about. But let's talk about, since we're on Europe and the economy, what some of the Republican presidential hopefuls are talking about. I want to bring up something that Mitt Romney talked about this morning. He was on CNBC saying that the U.S. is in danger of becoming Europe, blaming Obama's European policies is what he called them. And let's listen to what he said.
We are becoming a carbon copy of the sad European nations that have been struggling with poor economic conditions, and if that's the result of what's happening. We want to go back to being America.
So he's saying that Obama's to blame. The U.S. is becoming Europe. He says the solution is a lot of the cuts that he's proposing. Some of them on the laundry list, Dr. Roberts, are subsidies for Amtrak, funding for Planned Parenthood, and the National Endowment for the Arts funding. Now, I am not an expert, but I would wager to guess that war is more expensive than all of those things combined, and Romney is a guy who's out there rattling the sabers against Iran. So is this concept of the U.S. constantly saying that it can go to war with everyone and spend more than half of its discretionary spending on defense, is that what really needs to be tackled?
Yes, of course. They'll never be able to get the finances in order as long as they're fighting so many wars and are wanting to start more. Look, I'm no fan of Obama, and certainly not a fan of Santorum. But the economy we have now is the product of 15 years of jobs offshoring and of 10 years or 15 years of financial deregulation. And Obama had next to nothing to do with any of that. All of this began with Clinton, the financial deregulation, the offshoring. It exploded under Bush-Cheney. The deregulation of the financial system is the most irresponsible thing I've witnessed in my entire life.
Wow.
And the offshoring of jobs is amazing. We've lost 5.5 million manufacturing jobs in the last decade.
Yeah.
Today, there are 10 million fewer people employed than a decade ago, despite a decade of population growth. Obama had nothing to do with this. I agree, his policies aren't fixing it. But you see, they can't fix it because the corporations are too powerful. The military security complex is too powerful. Wall Street is too powerful. The country and all its policies are run for these groups.
Okay.
And that's why nothing can be fixed. These groups are milking the country dry.
Extraction is capitalism is what some have called it. I want to keep you here because I want to talk more about this. There's a few more things I want to get to with what you're saying about deregulation. We got to go to break quickly, though, so we will be right back with more with Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, economist and former Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Treasury under Reagan. And still ahead, Apple introduced its latest iPad today, complete with a sharper display and faster processor. The newest addition to the Apple family is available starting next Friday, but some analysts say we won't be seeing those long lines we're used to. We'll give you our 3 cents on their reason why. But first, your closing market numbers.
We just put a picture of me when I was like 9 years old on To Tell the Truth.
I have a confession. I am a total ghetto princess. I love rap and hip-hop music and Christian music.
I thought he was kind of a dick yesterday.
I'm very proud of the role that Al Jazeera has played.
You know how sometimes you see a story and it seems so whole and complete, you think you understand it, and then you glimpse something else. You hear or see some other part of it and realize everything you thought you knew, you don't know? I'm Tom Hartman. Welcome to The Big Picture.
What drives the world?
The fear-mongering used by politicians.
Who makes decisions?
Considerable breakthrough has already been made.
Who can you trust?
No one who is imbued with a global missionary zeal.
Where are we heading?
State-controlled capitalism is called fascism.
When nobody dares to ask, we do. RT, question more.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about and rehashing Super Tuesday, and I know that that's kind of an immediate issue, but this is the economy election, it's been dubbed, and a lot of the economic issues facing the U.S. are much longer term, require a much longer term outlook and solution, which is what we were talking about before the break with Paul Craig Roberts. He's economist and former Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Treasury under Reagan. So I want to bring back Dr. Roberts to follow up and ask him a couple more things because Dr. Roberts, Bill Gross, the co-founder of PIMCO, the largest bond fund in the world, I played what he said earlier about how both political parties don't have a long-term view that encourages long-term investment in the United States, and that's one of the issues. That's something you're talking about, too, it sounds like, with talking about how outsourcing has been this long-term problem that has shed all of these jobs over years. Now, in the same breath that I was listening to him say that, there's a story today that caught my eye that China is increasing its strategic petroleum reserves. It already did a first round of building up its reserves for an emergency, and now it's on to the second one. This is at the same time that we see the United States, this debate going on about using the strategic petroleum reserves to do something about gas prices because they're higher, and this feels very much like a political football. It's been used as a political football before during an election year where Obama wants to get reelected and Republicans are getting on him about the gas prices. So my question to you, is this an example of politics getting in the way of long-term strategic thinking when it comes to the economy of the United States?
Look, the politicians are there. They never know for how long.
Yeah.
Just like the CEOs. They're in office for, what, 4 or 5 years. And so they try to maximize their income. So the whole focus is on short-run profits for the corporations. And, you know, the oil thing, once the United States government let Goldman Sachs have the position limits on speculation removed, now investment banks and hedge funds can dominate commodity markets and drive the price wherever they want it, because speculators can now control these markets. So this is all comes back to the stupid policy of deregulation. And it was all for, you know, like short-term effects. The politicians get campaign contributions for the next election, and the CEO gets his bonus for that year. He gets multi-millions. So the whole thing works for a very few people for the short run only.
Yeah, and while we're on that issue of bankers, you bring up Goldman Sachs and speculation and deregulation, I want to play another soundbite of George Carlin. He's a comedian, and we heard from him earlier on maybe that it's not politicians that are dumb, but the public. And here's what we couldn't resist playing, what he said about bankers. Let's take a listen.
You got to start executing a few of these bankers. White, middle-class Republican bankers.
Okay, I'm not advocating executing any bankers, obviously, but does he make a good point? I mean, come on. We see people fighting tooth and nail on Wall Street over the Volcker rule, which is already so watered down that Volcker reportedly says it's embarrassing to have his name on it. So, I mean, come on. What do we need to do to rein in these bankers?
Well, first of all, there are no middle-class bankers.
Yeah, that's true.
They're all super rich, mega rich bankers. You know, Wall Street has so much money power, and now that the Supreme Court ruled last year that the corporations could give unlimited funds to political campaigns, then they simply are an oligarchy that control the country. It's how are you going to rein them in? I mean, what politician is going to move against them and lose all the campaign financing? And not only that, but they lose the cushy jobs if they get beat. See, a politician who gets beat, who served Wall Street, is picked up and made a vice chairman somewhere and given $1 million income. So
it's a great point. It's a revolving door, and as you said, so many of these issues these days all seem to come back to Citizens United. We're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for being on the show. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. That was Paul Craig Roberts, economist and former Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Treasury under Reagan. All right, before we go, let's talk about some of the stories that we want to talk about, the ones that caught our eye. A really good follow-up to when we brought you yesterday. I want to bring in Dimitri Kofinas in studio to talk about these stories. And look who is back, Shannon Donahoe in the control room. We missed you, Shannon. We're happy to have you back. I know our audience missed you, too. So yesterday, we told you about the computer Jeopardy champion, Watson, who's going to work on Wall Street. Citigroup hired him, whatever it is. Well, now, UBS head floor trader Art Cashin is talking about artificial intelligence, too. He's saying machines may explain some of the unusual synchronization in the financial markets yesterday. So the Dow was down 1.57%, the S&P down 1.54%, crude down 1.6%, gold down 1.7%. A little odd. What did Art Cashin say? Let's bring up his note. He said this. He said, that's a remarkably tight uniformity in a group of widely different assets. Such a cookie-cutter result suggests the very strong influence of dun-dun-dun-dun. I should have made that sound a little darker. Dun-dun-dun. Computer trading. So, is this Judgment Day? Are machines taking over a little like this?
The survivors of the nuclear fire called the war Judgment Day. They lived only to face a new nightmare, the war against the machines. The computer which controlled the machines, Skynet.
Well, Dimitri, I have to say yesterday I thought I won because I had a brilliant take on that story with greed not being programmed in. You had the whole Skynet angle. Now this. I don't know. Maybe I have to concede to you this time, as much as I am loath to. Why don't you take it away on the story?
In all honesty, though, so it's kind of funny, but it's kind of true, and I think that people are underestimating the extent to which we're under threat by this type of thing, moving artificial intelligence onto Wall Street. And I think before I was emphasizing the whole how thing, but I think before that even happens, I think we're at more risk of having a renewed bubble in this technology, where people begin to have too much confidence in these algorithms, these trading algorithms, where the machines begin to deleverage. So you saw like a little drop today, and Cashman was talking about it. Imagine if a 20 or 30% drop in the S&P, people start freaking out. All of a sudden, what happens? Congress steps in and says these machines are too big to fail. All right, we got to step in and save this technology.
Save the machines.
And then the machines insert the AI right in there, and they take over. So Judgment Day, what we saw in this movie with nuclear exchange was a joke. Okay. Banker with machine is what you should be worried about.
All right. So here's my question for Shannon. Shannon, come on. You be the arbiter here. Who is more terrifying? Jamie Dimon is the head of J.P. Morgan, or some Watson computer in his place making decisions? What do you think?
What's the most terrifying is you conceding to Dimitri.
Oh!
Look, you don't have to have both. You don't have to have one or the other. You can have both. It's the merger of banker and machine, of Dimon and the Terminator. It's the Dimonator.
The Dimonator.
The Dimonator. He's nickel and diming you for, that's what these guys do, man.
All right. Speaking of machines, let's switch gears to one that everybody can relate to, or a lot of people can relate to, because there's such a fervor about it. It's big news that Apple unveiled its new iPad today that'll be available starting March 16th. But Global Equities Research is saying consumers won't line up for the new tablet if gas prices remain high. Come on. Do we believe this? This is such bull. I think that people will sacrifice and miss work, carpool to work, whatever they need to do in order to get into these lines that we have seen time and time again to line up for the latest, greatest Apple product. I think people will sacrifice a lot to get the gadgets that they think that they need.
Totally. I mean, we talk about the power of the banking sector and the power of credit, but as powerful that is, it's not as powerful as the power of propaganda and consumerism. And people are just enamored with this idea that the only way they're going to have mating rights and status.
Whoa. Mating rights? You're saying guys need an iPad to get laid?
Absolutely.
The new iPad to get laid?
Of course. Listen, it's about, that's the connection. Are you kidding me? What do you think stimulates people to buy Air Jordans? What do you think makes them want to buy a Hummer? It's the peacock feather saying, hey, I'm worth mating with. Come mate with me. All right? That's what this is about.
There's a lot of women in line, too, though. So Shannon, what do you think? Why do people line up for these things? What's in it for women? Are they just trying to get laid, too?
Maybe, but I mean, Dimitri, it's all about personality. I'm not sure if having the new iPad is all about guys getting laid.
Who needs personality when you can have an iPad?
Who needs an iPad when you can have a Kindle Fire for cheaper?
Okay.
Oh, all right. Okay.
All right. We see some different priorities here. We'll let you decide why people line up for these iPads still, because that's all we have time for. That's our show. Thanks so much for watching, though, and don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Lauren Lister and give us feedback at youtube.com/CapitalAccount. That's our show. And from everyone here, thanks so much for watching, and have a great night.